history of Africans in America, the diaspora, did not begin with enslavement. We were kings, queens, building culture. But the trauma that we've experienced that is unaddressed is what keeps perpetuating itself.
But most of us as African Americans grow up knowing that we have to be twice as good, work twice as hard to get half as much.
Teaching a black male who looked like me in my 20s how to read, that was my wake-up call. That was my wake-up call because I had the advantage because I went to all-white school that he did not have.
When I walk into a room, no one knows anything about me except that I'm black and a female. You don't know that there's a PhD, you don't know I'm a mother, you don't know my religion, you don't know my marital status, but you know I'm black and a female.
When you look at the foundation of the government and how it was created, it's based on black and white. We were never supposed to have anything. My ancestors were brought here for a purpose, free labor. And anything more than that is more than you deserve.
I'm not a clinician, but I do see trauma, and I do see pain, and I do see barriers to care. And I do know that people in urban communities are dying prematurely.
When I walk through that hospital door, I can tell you story after story about how I or a family member have been mistreated, and there's no other rationale other than our race.
I am well-traveled, and the most racism and tension that I felt was right here at home, right here in the USA.
There's no such thing as a lazy slave, but we have been depicted around the world to be at the bottom, that we're shiftless, that we're criminalized. There are people who have been beaten down so long that they actually believe what is said about them.
Anything that stops our growth, anything that prohibits us from being ourselves, anything or any barrier that causes us to be oppressed and marginalized is traumatic.
The trauma was reinforced from enslavement through Jim Crow laws, through segregation. All the institutions reinforced this notion of black inferiority. Black life was not valued, with the exception of how it was connected with wealth production to white males.
We have hypervigilance, we have fear, we have the anxiety. Am I good enough? But when you're the minority, you feel this melting pot of emotions all at the same time. Whether we've experienced it individually through our actual persons, or this is something that's been passed down from generation to us.
Once I started learning more about black trauma and black pain, even at this age, I started better understanding my parents. I started better understanding some of our ancestors. Trauma is passed down generation to generation, and there is scholarly research that does suggest that it is locked in our cells. And so as we begin to experience certain things, that these cells are now, they're waking up, right? And we are responding to the trauma that's never been addressed historically.
In our DNA, all of us, all human beings, carry a thread of who their descendants were. Epigenetics is a part of the DNA thread that has the ability to change. It can change over a period of time because of environmental situations, and scientists believe that it can be corrected.
Why is this happening is because there are so many things that have contributed to the social breakdown, particularly for people of color. If we think about structural racism, for example, structural racism is the institutionalization of racism. It's our policies that have created an environment by which most Black and brown people are disadvantaged compared to their white counterparts.
We are raised in systems, and in these systems consist of church. It could be your family. It could be an educational system. It could be where you live, where you work.
You have services and resources in white communities that you have that unfortunately impact is you have opportunities that you don't have because you don't have those resources in Black and brown communities. That's a form of structural racism because it started with our history of slavery and separating individuals.
We're talking about a system of banking. So redlining was a thing. And in still some ways, I've read articles up until probably the last 30 days, still is a thing. If you live in certain pockets, you have better school systems. You live in an inner city, you don't. We saw such a deficit in some of our schooling and education system when COVID hit. The lack of internet at home, no computers or no devices to where you can do online learning and distance learning. These are deficits, but I can guarantee you if you go to some of the wealthier pockets, it's not a thing. If you're in a Black family, live in a Black area, then you've taught from generation, you don't trust, you don't do this. You have a whole list of do nots. So that's imparted into you, and you carry that wherever you go. It's exhausting. It is exhausting being Black in America.
Health inequities is really the state at which we're living in. It's where really primarily it's people of color. We know that most of what impacts somebody's health happens outside of the normal walls of a healthcare system. And that's often defined as the social determinants of health. So it's where we work, where we live, where we get educated, what we're exposed to in our environment. All of these things are considered the social determinants of health.
When you look at the disparities, whether it's HIV, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's cancer, asthma, we're at the top of the list.
Look in most African American urban communities. The quality of food, the type of food is fatty. The kind of restaurants.
Our housing policies historically, back to when my grandfather left fighting in World War II, promoted the segregation of housing. Housing itself contributes to whether or not you're healthier. It really can contribute to whether or not you can go outside and walk. Children of color suffer from asthma more than white kids, and they are hospitalized and enter the ER more than white children. Sometimes that is linked, and oftentimes linked, to their housing.
We first have to get over not going, because the very first thing is distrust. That's the very first barrier. So we have distrust, or we're uninsured or underinsured. So even if we wanted to go, we can't afford to go. When we get there, we articulate how we may feel. And the doctor said, no, you don't feel like that, it's this. And one dissatisfied visit with a physician takes us all the way back to I'm not going. I went, I tried, it didn't work, he said this, she said this, I don't agree, I'm okay. We're not.
A college-educated Black woman is 1.6 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related issues compared to a white woman who doesn't even have a high school diploma. It has nothing to do with education, has nothing to do with income. It's just that when we are in that hospital room, we are perceived and looked at differently.
Studies show that African American Black people are prescribed more antipsychotic medication than white counterparts. We are also misdiagnosed and more severely diagnosed. So the mark is missed when there's not cultural competency or awareness in practitioners. There's a feeling as if they have to explain the culture first before they can get to the reason that they're actually there. That has been told to me several times in practice. I don't have time to explain who I am before I get to why I'm here. So we skip the introduction to Blackness 101, and we can really handle the anxiety or depression or the trauma, that the reason why they're actually there.
We haven't created the policies that promote our health, and we've created a culture of stereotypes and of interpersonal norms which say that my life is worth less than somebody else's. And so at every level, Black people have a disadvantage related to their health.
This is the importance of having cultural competent and culturally aware practitioners in every single arena. It is important that when we show up for care, whether it's mental health or physical health, that we have someone that looks like us that can relate and say, I do understand.
We have to demand better of those around us. Healthcare should be a right. Healthcare should not be an option. It should not be based upon race. It should be a right.
It's uncomfortable for people to talk about this reality because it really does speak to who we are as a country, right? And, Black and brown communities, this has been their experience, in this country for centuries.
And so when we talk to our physicians, when we talk to other providers, I think our culture and our history plays a lot into that, and they need to understand. They need to understand. It is not easy to break those traditions, right? It's doable, but again, we have to teach it. And not only do we have to teach it, we have to lead in those areas as well.
I don't think we sometimes understand how unhealthy we are as a people, in the sense that we're used to generations of individuals being sick, so it becomes our norm. But we don't have to live like that. So educating on what we should expect from the healthcare system and what we should demand, and raising our voices to advocate for that, is really, really critical.
There's nothing wrong with having the unconscious bias. It's when we ignore it or we say that we don't have it, because that unconscious bias dictates our actions. It's more transparent to say, you know what, you might be right. So if someone points out, that might not have been the proper thing to say, or you did this and you may not even have realized it, but be open to learning and exploring your biases.
So there's a conversation that's happening, particularly happening now that we have so much research and data to support the disparities and inequities in communities. So we're now having those impacted engage, and also to validate those experiences that they have. And so the experts, the professionals, the practitioners are now analyzing that data, paying attention to it, and having conversations around it.
Maafa is a Swahili term which means the great calamity, the great suffering, which really is a combination of theatrical vignettes, dance, music, poetry, all in an effort to tell the story of what it was like to live free, to be snatched and in some cases negotiated away from your native land, to travel to unknown land in the Middle Passage, and then to be conditioned to go in your mind and spirit and body from fully human to being considered chattel property.
It not only tells a story, it unearths what our today issues are. and what is these things that we need to overcome.
It is to raise through the arts what is difficult for people to have discussions about, so that we can then have discussions.
My offer is for everyone, because everyone was affected by the great calamity of the transatlantic slave trade. So the end goal is for healing. Being able to, once this is over, to apply something to your life, to feel better about oneself. I've seen men play the roles of kings and are able to go back home and assert themselves in a particular way of pride and strength and the protector of their families. I've seen children excel in school because of the things that they have learned and have a different pride and trajectory about education and who they are.
What has happened to us was not right and was not our fault. And how do we move from that? How do we heal from that? And we can't do that unless we're taught that, unless we create safe and what I call sacred spaces to have these conversations. It's necessary if we're going to heal as a people, and it's necessary if we're going to break these chains, if we're going to break the cycles.
Our society makes us feel powerless on most days, and makes it hard for us to believe that there is power within. But there is so much power that we have in ourselves. There's so much power that we have in our communities. And we've got to tap into that and demand better.
Listen to the narrative and story of someone else who doesn't share your story, your experience. And I think that will bridge our common goal of understanding what humanity really should look like.
I look at life and say, I am the answered prayer of my forefathers. And that the work we don't do for ourselves. We're human beings. We all have feelings. We all want to be loved. We all want some sort of peace in our lives.
A part of the hope is not necessarily that things will change in our life, but hope is having the strength and the determination to stand up.
I believe we can't lose hope. Always believing that tomorrow may be better than today. Tomorrow, I can make a change, even small. I can make a change. Tomorrow, if promised, I can do something to make the world a better place for somebody else. I believe that joy is tied to hope.
And with that hope comes light. And with that hope comes healing. And with that hope, we rise to the morning, right? That we can do whatever work that we need to do, but hold on to hope, because that's the only thing we have right now, is hope that one day things will get better. One day we can all be well and healed. One day we can be whole as a people, as a community, as a nation, and as a world. When it feels like we're in the dark of the night, joy does come in the morning.